the guy at the very top here, clear cut, tier 1 by himself, Kyle Pitts, tight end out of Florida, 246 pounds, 6'6". I'm going to start by saying this. If you listen to the podcast, you've heard me say this a couple of times. This is the best tight end I've ever scouted on film in the history of scouting players at the position. I love me some TJ Hockenson, but this guy is in a different class all himself. He's into that Jeremy Shockey, Kellen Winslow Jr. kind of mold, right? Super big, very athletic. He was a 2020 John Mackey Award winner. He's also the first tight end ever to be named the Biletnikoff Award finalist. Finished the year for 43 catches, receptions for 770 yards and 12 receiving touchdowns. Had 6 consecutive quarters with 12 touchdowns as well. Now, he also missed 3 games last year because he had a concussion at the end of the year, and he's even sat out his bowl game. But this is a guy who has very good hands. He's never, ever dropped, according to Pro Football Focus, a red zone pass. In the history of his career, he's never dropped one. He wins jump balls on an everyday basis. This guy just dominates. And what he is, I mean, he's not a good blocker, but that's fine.
He's a try-hard blocker.
I don't think he's a terrible blocker.
No, he's a willing blocker.
For a guy that runs routes like a wide receiver, he actually blocks pretty well. I mean, and he's a big-bodied guy that moves.
The biggest thing with him is he's just so tall at times that he just doesn't get low enough.
That's the thing. It's a leverage thing for him.
Exactly.
He needs to bulk up if he's going to be that high.
But you would assume a guy that is that talented in the passing game would just completely neglect the blocking game and could get away with it.
Like Harrison Bryant.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. But he does not.
No, he's a willing blocker. Let me put this. The foundation's there for him to get better in the NFL. It's not, but I don't even care. I don't care if he ever blocks in his entire life because I don't need him to because he's just he's such a mismatch. He dominates linebackers and he's too big for the cornerbacks.
Yeah, and if an NFL coach is using him as a blocker, he's doing it wrong. You know what I mean? He's such an offensive weapon out there catching passes that if that's his main job, then that head coach should be fired or whoever the offensive coordinator is should be fired.
Yeah, he attacks all levels of the field. There's nowhere where he's not a dominant weapon for your fantasy football team. I mean, if you want the next Darren Waller, Travis Kelce, you see a lot of comps on Kyle Pitts to Darren Waller is his closest because Darren Waller, the former big receiver as well.
It is the closest we can get. But
I'll even go farther. Like he's like a Calvin Johnson, right? So
that's the best comp, and it's weird because they're not the same position.
You hear me talk about the podcast a lot, like the tight end position, and why I love the tight end position so much is because if you look last year on the best ball leagues, for example, most of those leagues that won had Travis Kelce on their roster because Travis Kelce was giving you wide receiver 1 numbers at the tight end position. It's a huge edge you can get over your opponents because that pool of talent is so small. We always talk about the pool of talent as the top 6, right? The top six, because the top 6 is in a different tier from 7 to 15, right? Well, tier 1 of that, because the top 6 is not its own tier. Tier 1 is Darren Waller, Travis Kelce. You can argue Travis Kelce is his own tier. Kyle Pitts has a chance to be in that tier, right?
Sure.
TJ Hawkinson's my tight end 2. I love him. He's fantastic. George Kittle's my tight end 1 because George Kittle's in that mold too. But to get a guy like Kyle Pitts that can put up wide receiver 1 numbers, he's a difference maker. In a tight end premium league, I'd be as okay with taking him high as 1.4. And in a non tight end premium league, a 1 QB league, I'd still be okay with taking him as high as 1.3. 1.4 because he's a difference maker. I know he's not going to be. I know it's kind of hard. Like sometimes people want to have a hard time taking a tight end that high, but I think Kyle Pitts is an exception to the rule because he can give you those wide receiver 1 numbers in the tight end position, a la Travis Kelce, what he does, which again gives you that edge. If you see some best ball startups, you'll see Travis Kelce go 1.2, 1.3, 1.4 because they know it's that much of a difference maker in their league, and that's what Kyle Pitts can get you. And what I really think he's going to make the difference is not only on his receptions, not only on his yards gained, but touchdowns. He is absolutely such a mismatch versus anybody in the NFL right now, and that's touchdowns. And touchdowns are the bread and butter when it comes to fantasy football production. And this is what he offers on top of the receiving yards, on top of the receptions. I mean, he gets in and out of his breaks, and he catches the ball like a wide receiver. He's a hands catcher.
Sudden, you know what I mean? He's not one of these big guys that's lumbering and kind of rounds off his routes. He's sudden in and out of his breaks. He can sink his hips. For a guy that's 6'6", 246 pounds, that's rare. It doesn't happen. And not to mention the fact that he can go up, like you said, on the jump balls and out jump guys. I mean, most tight ends, they're big and that's how they use their height. They're just big. They normally can't also on top of it jump. You know what I mean? They don't have great verticals, but this guy can go up and do it, and he uses his hands so well. And
he's a basketball player type athlete,
absolutely,
at the tight end position. And those are, we see a lot of like converted tight ends that or converted basketball players that become good tight ends. I don't know that he necessarily has the basketball career that, we talked about with like Jimmy Graham or Antonio Gates or different guys like that end up panning out. But it's that same type of thing that you would have expected to see had he been, a big time basketball player. He really is an incredible prospect. The one thing that I will say real quick that is going to be difficult is the hype on Kyle Pitts, and it's deserving. It's 100% deserving. But the hype is so high. I'm not sure I'm going to have a ton of shares of Kyle Pitts just because, I don't know that I can quite, in a 1 QB league, take him at 3 or 4, which I could see him going there at times.
I wouldn't argue, is what I'm saying.
Right.
If you
but
trade
I do think there's going to be somebody in those leagues that are going to try to take him top 5, and that's going to be the hardest part. Is he's so talented and worth it. Tight end's just it's a really hard one to project.
It is.
He's the clearest one we've ever had, probably, but it's still just so hard to predict.
There's so much evidence on the contrary, too, to say like the Eric Ebron type of guys or the Evan Ingrams, the high draft picks.
But Eric Ebron had hand issues even coming out. He didn't have when you saw him, he didn't have the strength that Kyle Pitts has. That's the difference for me. I'm not comparing him to some of these other guys that went high because he's different in that category. That's why I went back to the when I was watching stuff on Jeremy Shockey, Kellen Winslow, guys that still went really high, but had no questions on the hands, right? Eric Ebron was a great prospect, but his hands were never the great, and you never looked at him and gave him a Calvin Johnson comp, for example. I really think this is an outlier. I wouldn't say, oh, guys, I'd be okay with him going at 4 in a 1 QB league or a time Premier League if I wasn't that confident in him. I think he's a difference maker from day one, the moment he steps on the football field. And again, I understand that I think it's a problem a lot of people in Dynasty are going to have. There's Jalen Waddle, there's Devontae Smith, there's Devontae Williams. Yeah, that's great, but you can find other guys like that. Sure. You cannot find Calvin. Just imagine. Again, and here's the thing too.
It's the bodies theory. There's only so many bodies that are like this guys and that can move like this in the world. You know what I mean? It's the world theory.
He's LeBron James, essentially playing football is what it is. And he's only 20 years old, right? So he doesn't turn 21 till October. So this is a guy, just imagine if you can go back in time right now, and I told you guys right now, and I told everybody listening, you can get Travis Kelce, who's 31 now, and the production Travis Kelce is going to get you for the next 10 years right now. How high are you taking him in this draft? And that's why I told you right now. This guy is Travis Kelce right now. He's going to give you Travis Kelce production for 10 years at the tight end position. How high are you taking him?
If that's the output that you can guarantee you're going to, then you can take him 1. I mean, you can argue that,
fair enough. That's
worth it, because any other person that you're going to take there, who knows? It's a crapshoot. And the running backs obviously have such a short window that, obviously you could bump him right up ahead of any of those guys. So then you're really just talking Jamar Chase and Smith.
See, and here's the problem.
Those guys are the argument anyway.
Again, everything's a gamble, right? We're playing. This is a risk. All draft picks are risks.
Yeah, it's just our best educated guess.
If you're asking me though, Rich, give me the for sure things in this draft. Things that you would literally have to bet your life on. You have to give me a player or 2. The 2 players I would bet my life on that we're going to have talent at the next level would be Najee Harris. It's going to be Kyle Pitts. That's my only 4 sures, right? My only 4 sures are going to be really they're going to produce and you're going to be happy with them, right? There's going to be no dud effect. And you said I can only pick 1. It'd be Kyle Pitts. 100% it'd be Kyle Pitts, hands down.
I don't know if you read his stats from this past season, but he only played in 8 games. He had 43 receptions, 770 yards, and 12 touchdowns.
That's
12 touchdowns. So, do the math. There's 16 games in the NFL. He played 8 last year. Just double those numbers. 86 receptions, 1,540 yards, and 24 touchdowns. Does that sound like an okay season?
It's that easy at the next level.
Just boom.
And the cool part about him is sometimes you have these freak prospects, and they do one thing really, really well. That's the special part about him. he does a lot of things really, really well. It's not just he's got to win the jump ball or he's not going to be successful. It's not he's just got to, fix, he's got great hands, but, I don't know about what, like literally you can point to every category that matters for fantasy purposes.
You can throw him
catch
screens. You can throw, anything.
He's got
his
good
over the shoulder
wheels.
ability. They can catch over the shoulder
He
like a wide
adjusts
receiver.
to really crappy pass as well.
He does. And I think that's the thing that, going back to your point, Rich, that's what does give me the hope that I would maybe even consider taking him that high, even though I don't think that I will, but I would consider it because of those things. Like I also feel very strongly that the likelihood of him busting, everyone has a chance to bust,
Sure.
but the likelihood of him busting is so minuscule compared to most players.
And it also depends on your team. Who's on your team? Where your roster? Where's your biggest needs? And I'm not saying I would. Again, this is not me saying take him at. I'm not sitting there on this podcast going, you got to take him at 4.
Right.
I'd say I'd be okay with it. You know what I mean?
Right.
In a super flex tight end premium, like I want one of those 4 quarterbacks, 1, 2, 3, 4, essentially, right? If I need a quarterback. And then I love Najee Harris because Najee Harris is a difference maker. I think if Najee Harris pans out, you can get Kyle Pitts. Like that's the thing. For any good running back, you can get a high-end tight end for the most part. But again, try and get Travis Kelce if he's 25 years, putting those numbers up. George Kittle right now. Try and buy George Kittle. You're paying a high-end premium for that because it's that much of a difference maker on your team. So for me, Kyle Pitts, like I'm okay with taking him that high. Sure. I want to see where he ends up in the NFL draft. I would love him on the Chargers. Yes. I did a guest podcast at the Feverish Fernaro podcast. He's like, where's your dream landing spot? I'm like, the Chargers. Hands down. You match him up with Justin Herbert's arm, and you got Austin Eckler in the backfield with Mike Williams and Keenan Allen on the outside. Like that, the middle of that field would be so open for him every single time. He's going to have 85 catches for 1,300 yards and 20 touchdowns.
Can you imagine the Chiefs-Chargers games twice a year with those two offenses? That would be pay-per-view TV.
That would be.
And whoever drafts him, he's going to go top 10. And whoever drafts him, they're going to utilize him like Travis Kelce's used, like how Darren Waller is going to use. Like he's going to be there. There's nowhere he's going to go where he's not going to be the focal point. I would love him if somehow say
Dallas. Ooh,
Dallas would be nice.
With all those other weapons.
That's so much. See, Dallas, I wouldn't be as in love with because there's so many other weapons there. Like there's so many other balls to go around. Like Carolina, I would love him in Carolina with Joe Brady. I know, but you know what I mean? Like, they're going to pound the rock with Zeke.
So many other places for the ball to go.
I mean, I like him anywhere, to be fair. But Dallas would be a little bit lower on my list for him, personally.
All right.
I would because I want him to go somewhere where he could be I want him to be the focal point of this offense, essentially, in the passing game. That's where that's how strong I think he is that number one target.
First or second option. No lower than that.
Yeah, and I think that's what he could be in for the Chargers, personally. Dallas would be a nice fit as well. I think they really need to fix their defense. I think they have enough weapons on offense. But he's one of those prospects, doesn't matter where he goes. Go to Arizona. I love him there. You know what I mean? It's like
I think Arizona would be a good spot, too.
It's going to be a nice spot. Put him in Cincinnati with Joe Burrow. I'm okay with him there. Which is weird that Joe Burrow, that Cincinnati offered Kenny Galladay a 1-year high contract.
I did see that. That's interesting.
It sounded Cincinnati. We'll talk that about a free agency show. So for Kyle Pitts, for me, can't miss prospect. Does everything well. He's basically a giant wide receiver. He's Calvin Johnson.
I was going to say, he does things better than well. I think you're understating it when you say he does everything well. Because, I mean, his blocking, I think he does well.
Yeah.
And that's like his lowest type of measure, I think.
If you guys were to, now I know you guys don't do other scouting for other positions, linemen, that kind of stuff. But as far as like what you guys have seen, if you were to give him a grade, do you think he would be the highest grade out of any player at any position in this year's class or even a lot of the years?
Oh, no, Trevor Lawrence would be the highest graded player in this class.
That was going to be my question betwing him and Trevor Lawrence.
Yeah, it's hard because you hear about like the offensive lineman like Sewell out of Oregon, like supposed to be really good. You hear about, but for me, offensively, he'd be pretty high. Again, he's the best tight end I ever watched on film, ever.
He's probably, how about this? He's probably one of the biggest difference makers. You know what I mean? Like you can argue he is the biggest difference maker.
Quick trivia.
From a fantasy
What's the highest a tight end's ever gone in the NFL draft?
Vernon Davis.
That is incorrect.
104.
104, I thought.
You see, this guy, I already told him.
I thought it was 4, though, also before he said
Matt, you
something.
get credit.
Thank
Jared
you.
doesn't.
Yeah,
4 is the highest. Mike Ditka.
Like I was just saying, it was Ditka,
4.
right? It was,
and there was
if you
two
give me
other
one
guys.
more second, I would have said it was Ditka.
I was trying to think of who it was.
It was all pre-60s like that.
Yeah, there was one guy in the 60s, one in the 50s, and one in the 70s.
Because then it was Vernon Davis, Kellen Winslow Jr.
Hawkinson's up there because he was
up there at
8.
8. Yeah. So, but I think before we get off Kyle Pitts, one thing I want to reemphasize here then about Kyle Pitts is everything we talked about obviously makes him sound like the second coming of Travis Kelce, which is fine. But the most important thing that I want to harp here is when we scout these players, we're looking for things that they could do well to help their NFL team, but most importantly, to help your fantasy team. To me, Kyle Pitts is fantasy football gold, right? You hear me talking about like these players are dynasty gold. Kyle Pitts is dynasty gold. That's what he is. So not only is he very talented, we see a lot of players that are very talented. O.J. Howard for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers was a very talented tight end, but we had a little bit lower because he didn't scream fantasy production because he's a really good blocker, right? So that doesn't. Hunter Henry's pretty solid, you know what I mean? But he's not dynasty gold. So for me, Kyle Pitts is everything you could ever dream of out of a dynasty tight end. Travis Kelce, Darren Waller, George Kittle. That's what you want. There's only 3 of those guys in existence, and one's 31. This kid's 20 years old.
And I think that is the perfect place to end it. The scarcity of those upper echelon tight ends there are only 3 of them. And you're looking for the next one because those are the type of guys that can win you championships. If you plug those guys in your lineup, they're championship winners.
He's a championship caliber player. He solves your worry at that position for the next 10 years. You will never worry about who you're putting in your starting tight end spot for 10 years. That is such a good commodity to have in Dynasty Fantasy Football. That also overstates it. That's what gives you that bump over the running backs. He's such a good commodity for a long time and puts you in a position in your draft. You no longer have to worry about it. And now you can draft other positions and let them fall to you.
Tight end, though, is notorious for being the hardest position to learn. So if he doesn't have 100 yards on 10 catches his first game, don't give up hope. It won't take him long.
3 years.
But
not him. He'll be Hawkinson, who contributed year 2 as a top 5 tight end.
I could see that as well, but we know how impatient people can be. He'll be yelling at us after week 3 when he hasn't had a 100-yard game.
Kyle Pitts will be a top 7 fantasy tight end this year, his rookie year.